Hello, everyone. Yet once again, it's another day of fresh grace and mercy. This is the Guilt, Grace, Gratitude podcast, where we bridge the gap to Reformed Christian theology for your listening pleasure. Today is on season 4, the Reformed Church. We're doing episode 3, the Belgic Confession. And we will have on Pastor Danny Hyde from Oceanside URC in Oceanside, California. Well, technically, Carlsbad, California. He is Peter's pastor, so we'll talk to him here in a few moments about the Belgic Confession. And just as a reminder on our show notes, after this episode, go ahead and take a look at our show notes or before the episode. And there's a few links on there. There's one for the Society of Reformed Podcasters. This is a group of Reformed podcasts that have like-minded doctrine out there. We're a member of this group, so you can check out a list of other shows to take a listen of. And then there is a link to the NAPARC Church Finder, so you can type in your zip code and find the closest Reformed church near you. You can find some information on how to get a hold of us if you ever want to reach out and ask questions or just talk to us and get a hold of us. You can find us on social media through Twitter and Instagram. You can email us at guiltgracepod@gmail. And we will, there's also some information about becoming a bridge builder, which is what we call our supporters of our show. So we will jump in and talk to Pastor Hyde. I'll let Peter further introduce his pastor.
Yeah. So if you guys have listened to any of our episodes before, I think you've been on 3 or 4. I forget the number. You're one of the regulars. But yeah, how's it going? It's good to have you back on.
Thanks for having me. It's going well. Maybe by the next time I'm on the show, I'll be doctor. I'm almost done.
That's right. Yeah. That was my next question. I saw your tweet about it a couple days ago. How's that going?
I'm like in the holding pattern right now. So I'm like in one of the rings of purgatory. So I'm waiting to hear back from the doctoral committee.
Okay.
Which is made up of 5 people, not my supervisor's approved, and then it goes on to a committee of 5, not including the supervisors. So waiting for those 5 to give me the thumbs up or the thumbs down.
That's right. Yeah. That Caesar reference. Yeah. I was about to say that. Who's the actor behind that? I always forget.
Joaquin Phoenix.
That's right.
Gladiator.
Phoenix.
Like
you. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So after that, so the big question for me is, are we going to have to call you Reverend Doctor or Dr. Reverend? Which way does it go?
I guess in the United States, it's like usually it's like the Reverend goes first and the doctor comes second. But in the Netherlands, it's Professor Doctor. Yeah, they put
I'll call you
first. The
Professor Dr. Reverend Danny Hyde.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not technically a professor, but yeah, something like that. It's all good.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, cool. Yeah, it's good to have you back on, and we're going to talk about today the Belgic Confession. So we had Dr. R. Scott Clark last week on the Heidelberg Catechism, which is
nice.
In the middle of writing a commentary on, is about done with it. But you've written on this. I'll show those who are on YouTube this book right here with heart in mind. So it's a kind of a commentary / like an exposition, like theological background of the Belgics. What got you into, obviously you're in a 3-form church, you're a pastor of a 3-form church, but what got you into the Belgic?
Well, first of all, the title is an acronym for one of the great 80s bands, Wham, right? So with heart and mouth. And I'm known to make a good quote or two from the pulpit to give a Wham lyric every once in a while, and then I get made fun of. But
I guess I missed those because I was not born in the 80s.
So that's George Michael before George Michael, right? Anyways, that's my 80s reference for the day. So like you said, I mean, I'm a pastor in a Reformed church, and our local church and our group of churches and our historical tradition of churches uses the Belgic Confession as one of our statements of faith.
Mm-hmm.
And as you're teaching, preaching, visiting people, teaching new members and that kind of stuff, you get lots of questions, and you're teaching people and kind of leading them into what it means to be a Reformed Christian. So, I taught through, I used in Sunday school or maybe the evening services at times, the Belgic Confession as a guide and sort of an outline for topical kind of doctrinal sermons. And so just as I was reading and researching and just compiling notes, it ended up becoming a book. So yeah, wham, with heart and mouth. There you go.
So how would like kind of background, so like who wrote the Belgic, why did he write it, like who's it written to, like what's kind of all those basic stuff?
Yeah, good question. So basically, the publication date is 1561.
Okay.
And
so this is before the Heidelberg.
Yeah, so 2 years before the Heidelberg Catechism, and is primarily written by a man by the name of Guy de Bray, or Guido de Bray sometimes, but Guy de Bray. So he was.
He's not from Jersey Shore, right?
No.
He's not a Guido.
He's from another shore. He's on. He's from the western shore of like what would today be northern France or Belgium. So
got it. Yeah.
So yeah,
that may pass by people's reference, but if you guys saw Jersey Shore like in the late 2000s, you'll know what I'm talking about.
There you go. Yeah. It was a little bit. You're too young for me. So that was like, after I was a pastor, I had to be holy. I couldn't watch TV shows anymore. So I did watch a lot of MTV in my youth, I should say, and that's where the Wham stuff comes from. So so it's called the Belgic Confession, Confessio Belgica. It's because it was written in what was called the Low Countries, and like became known as what we call today Belgium. So a French speaking or a Flemish speaking region of Europe. And so Guy de Bray was he was like an apprentice. His dad was a very, very accomplished stained glass window maker for the church in what is today Belgium. And Guy became convinced of the Reformation of the Protestant doctrine of justification by faith alone. And so he became a Protestant, right? And so he left that behind. And eventually, there was very heavy persecution because that region was governed by the King of France at the time. And also sort of competing loyalties between the King of France and the King of Spain. They both had sort of overlordship in that general region. There was always wars and battles. So Protestants were very heavily persecuted. So Guy traveled to England. He traveled to Geneva, various parts of the Reformational world, and studied and learned, and eventually wanted to write a confession of faith, a declaration of what they believed for the Reformed Christians in that region of the Low Countries, today Belgium. So he wrote it. It was kind of modeled off of a confession called the French Confession of Faith.
Okay.
And that was written 2 years earlier, so 1559. And it's basically kind of a summary of Calvin's theology for the churches in France. So it's very similar in the outline and structure and even some of the verbiage, but a little bit different. And so he was writing it to the King of Spain, who ruled over that region called the Low Countries, even though he was a French speaker. He wrote it, bundled it up with sort of a couple copies and a letter to the king, basically wanting to say that we're not rebellious, we're not wild-eyed fanatics. We pray for the king, we're submissive to the king. We want to see the king know the truth and reform the church, not make a new church, but reform the church. And so the story goes, he tossed it over the wall of the castle, and that's how it became known. So so it's basically and later on he became a martyr. He died for his faith. So it's a confession of a persecuted group of Christians seeking to obey the government, but also at the same time plead for freedom of conscience and freedom of worship and religion, and but also tell the king, hey, we're Catholics, right? We're Christians. We're we hold to very ancient truths, and you see a lot of that in the confession itself.
I got a couple questions. I'll go one at a time, but Peter mentioned something earlier in the episode that we kind of brushed over, and I don't want to.
The Guido reference, right?
Oh yeah, well, I am part Italian, so
That's
it's not part. But no, is the I won't take offense to it. Don't worry. So there, Peter mentioned something about you're part of a three-form church. So what does that mean for the audience?
Yeah, good question. It's not about, shapes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Circle,
We're not
square,
triangles walking around.
rectangle,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
So three forms or formulas or formularies, that's a reference, sort of a shorthand reference to the Belgic Confession of Faith, the Heidelberg Catechism, which you guys mentioned, you talked about before, and then the canons of Dort. So those three historic Protestant Christian confessions of faith, we kind of used a little shorthand lingo in our little circle, right, of the three forms. So somebody says, oh, what kind of church is it? What's your confession? Oh, the three forms. And that just means, the Belgic canons and Heidelberg.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, just good clarification for the audience. And
Yep.
so let's see. The Belgic Confession has 37 articles, right? And
It
this
does.
is and I have it right in front of me here too. And it starts with Article 1, the only God, and it goes to Article 37, the last judgment.
Mhm.
Now, why is it called an article? Because I look at other confessions and they don't technically say articles. They say chapters or, even doctrines.
It's a lot shorter than other confessions too. It's like maybe more
Yeah.
like succinct. Like, well, yeah, what's the difference between like this and like a Westminster Confession that's so stinking long?
Yeah, there's no difference in terms of the verbiage. I mean, just an article or a chapter. I mean,
Yeah.
it just technically speaking, an article of faith, is a statement. Like the Apostles' Creed has 12 articles within it, 12 little lines, right? I believe in God the Father Almighty, Jesus Christ, only begotten Son. Like there are 12 articles, so 37 articles, 37 sort of topics of truth. That's kind of like what it's trying to say.
And so that helps clarify why this is a confession and not a creed or a catechism, right? Because it's the format.
Technically speaking, a creed, right, is like one of the ancient Christian creeds, the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, Athanasian Creed. A catechism is a question and answer. A canon, we'll get, I guess the next episode we'll discuss that. What is a canon? And then we have this is a confession, right? So it's like all these things. In general, they're all speaking the same thing, right? They're all teaching, professing what we believe. So, whether we call them catechisms or canons or confessions, creeds, I mean, we're in general, we're referring to the same thing. Like these are statements of Christian, truth and theology.
Okay.
Yeah. So if I can add on to that too, maybe another question, because I know the Westminster Confession of Faith, kind of written in the 1640s and kind of codified in 1647 under like a specific historical circumstance. We'll get to an episode on that as well. But with Guy de Bray and some of the other authors or like contributors to this, they wrote this, like you said, like a specific historical circumstance. And from what I've read and reading in your book, a lot of it had to do with the Catholic Church, either persecution under the Catholic Church, or we're trying to distinguish between what we believe and what they believe. So it's like, how does that play into how this confession was written?
Yeah. So on the one hand, it's definitely, written to a Roman Catholic king and, to all the people in his court and all of his, bishops and so forth, who advise him. And so that's why it reads I would say very simply. It reads like, kind of follows the pattern of the Apostles' Creed.
Yeah.
And, it's it emphasizes over and over and over again. Just as an example, like in Articles 8 and 9 about the Trinity, it even references the ancient Christian creeds. And it uses, like in the articles on Jesus, like, the language of his two natures, right? So it's very like self-consciously trying to show a Roman Catholic king that Reformed Protestants are Catholics with a small c, right? Are historic Christians, and that we believe nothing different than the early church. So that's kind of like the code, right? Like that's like the underhanded, like polemical, battle that's going on between the Roman Catholic Church and the Reformational churches. Who's the real Catholic, right? Who's the real ancient Christian? So that's sort of that's important in the context. And then also there's references throughout also to the teachings of a group called the Anabaptists. So, the articles about who Jesus is, his true humanity, for example, it has a whole thing about he has a real human nature. He doesn't have what was called by some a celestial flesh, meaning that he didn't have some special kind of human flesh that was sent down out of heaven. That's what some Anabaptist groups taught. That's why the article about baptism talks about, infant baptism. We reject the error of the Anabaptists who only, who rebaptize, right? So they were doing that because, from the Roman Catholic point of view, like all these Protestants were just kind of wild-eyed fanatics, and they're all the same. And the Reformed churches were saying, no, we're not rebellious against civil government like some Anabaptist groups were. We don't rebaptize people like the Anabaptists do. That's literally what an Anabaptist means, a rebaptizer. And we have a historic Christian Christology, a belief in who Jesus is, contrary to the Anabaptists. So you have that, like, that's what's going on. Like, it's fighting against Roman Catholics and trying to distance itself from Anabaptists.
Yeah, and I think that historical stuff is good to understand. And there's obviously some didactic or doctrinal stuff that's trying to be explained, but it's not done in a vacuum. He's not like kind of in an ivory tower doing his own thing, writing 37 articles and then just bam, placing on the Reformed church. It comes from a certain circumstance, and he's writing to real people at a real time under real persecution. I'm trying to understand, what is a Reformed church? What do we believe? And are we different than other people who believe either the same stuff or differences? I think it's good stuff to understand. Like, the people that we follow, the people who have codified the faith that we confess as well, they're not just ivory tower theologians. They're real, in-fleshed, had to work through stuff, were persecuted. So that these come from like the fires of a lot of thought and a lot of hurt, I think, as well. There's a lot of stuff that goes into this. So I think that it's helpful background.
Yeah. This might be a hard question to answer, but if you had to pick, maybe one or two of your favorite or most used articles in the Belgic Confession, ones your long experience of being a pastor, not trying to age you by saying long experience, but you've done a lot of work and for God's people, and you've gone to the Belgic Confession for apologetics and all that stuff so many times. You must have one or two articles you feel like you've brought out top of mind more than others. What do you think?
Yeah, my favorite, I guess at least one of my favorite parts of the Belgic Confession is not one that people would turn to mostly, but Article 26 on the intercession of Christ. So it's dealing with Jesus being the mediator, and so at the beginning it talks about not having we have no access to God except through Jesus, the only mediator and intercessor. So obviously it's saying that in contrast to the Roman Catholic Church, and it goes on to say this mediator whom the Father has appointed between himself and us ought not terrify us by his greatness, so that we have to look for another one according to our fancy, our imagination. And that's coming right out of like the late medieval period, where the iconography of who Jesus is him on a throne, and him as a king, and him standing over like under his feet are all the people in hell, who are burning and who are being punished for their sins. So there's a lot of fear about who Jesus is, and that's why and that leads to the sort of on the side of that, or in place of that, all the saints and the Virgin Mary, right, as intercessors, as more accessible intercessors, right? Jesus is a great, he's a king, he's so glorious and majestic, he's fearful to us, but we can go to loving Mary, right? Like she's our mom.
Yeah.
And then like towards the end, Well, basically the line, what the line says is like God, when God gave him to us. I'm sorry, there it is. It's towards the beginning. My bad.
Oh.
It says, for neither, right after it says he's the mediator, he shouldn't scare us. For neither in heaven nor among the creatures on earth is there anyone who loves us more than Jesus Christ does. Suppose we had to find another intercessor who would love us more than he who gave his life for us, even though we were his enemies. Who will be heard more readily than God's own dearly beloved son? Talking about, to pray, right? God will hear his own son. What are you afraid of? And then one of the lines, it's in there somewhere, I'll think about it probably later, but it says, God knew when he gave his son for us. Here it is. Since it's pleased God to give his son as our intercessor, let us not leave him for another, or rather seek without ever finding. For when God gave him to us, he knew well that we were sinners. So it's an awesome article about, Jesus being the mediator, contrary to the Roman Catholic understanding of that. And, trying to very practically tell us, you don't have to be afraid of him. God knew when he gave his son for you that you were a sinner. That's why he gave him to you.
Yeah.
So you can pray, right?
Yeah. So maybe, so we broadening out the vision too, even like looking through your book, like you divide the Belgic into, I think, 5 parts. So if you can describe, like,
I think it's like 5 or 6.
Yeah. So it's like how, how is, you talked a little bit about like, it's kind of expounding on the Apostles' Creed, like going kind of further out. So how is it structured? How is the Belgic structured? How can you,
so basically talks about God, talks about humanity and sin, talks about Jesus, talks about salvation, talks about the church, and then talks about the end, right? Eschatology. So God, who God is, the Trinity, his attributes, how he reveals himself to us in creation, especially the Word, deals with the creation, the fall, the sin of us as a human race, Jesus as the great mediator and the savior, and the promised seed of the woman, who is both divine and human, and who gave his life for us upon the cross to satisfy the wrath of God for our sins. And then we receive that by faith alone, and God to help us in our faith, to help us to continue to cling to him, unites us to Jesus as a part of the church, and gives us sacraments, word and sacraments, baptism and communion, and he's going to come again for us, right? And so we have nothing to fear. We're going to look up with uplifted head, and all of our persecutors are going to be put away, and we're going to be received into God's kingdom forever. So there you go. That's the sermon right there, the whole thing.
All right. Yeah.
And I mean, all these confessions are really defending scripture and explaining who God is, and redemptive history and salvation and apologetics and all that stuff. But because they are separate confessions, even historically, I imagine that some of them bring something unique or different to the table. So on a practical question, why or when would I bring out the Belgic Confession compared to other confessions, based on maybe its uniqueness?
I mean, as far as like a confession goes, and I'm sure Dr. Clark mentioned this with the Heidelberg Catechism, it's like a very practical, pastoral, and it's written for kids, and used to educate children and so forth in church and school. The Belgic Confession it's one of the early Reformed confessions, and so it reads in a similar way as the Heidelberg Catechism. It's very pastoral and warm and gentle and practical and applicatory. So it says very similar things to, like, say, the Westminster Confession is going to say later on, like 80 years later. But the Westminster Confession says it in a little more like precise way, whereas the Belgic Confession says it in more like kind of like a sermon almost. It professes the faith, but it also gives lots of like application throughout the articles about how this helps us and the benefit of the stuff for us.
Okay.
So yeah, it's just a little more like, it's, in my opinion, it's a little more, practical, pastoral.
Okay. I got two more questions, and Nick, if he wants to interject between them. But the first one is we have three forms of unity. We'll talk about the other two. We talked about one with Dr. Clark. We'll talk with you. They'll hear this. Our listeners will hear this next week. But why are there three different confessions within the Reformed Church? There's Heidelberg, there's the Belgic, and there's the canons. Versus, I think some people might look at the Presbyterian Church, like the more explicitly Presbyterian Church, like, oh, they just have the Westminster. But then the Reformed have these three. So why do we have three versus just looking at one?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they have three too. They have Westminster Confession plus the shorter and larger catechism.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but as far as like the historic Reformed churches on the continent of Europe, the Dutch Reformed churches, especially, why do we have three? They're all three of them are written by different people or peoples. They're written at different times and different places, and in different languages too. So it's kind of strange. Heidelberg obviously is written in German and Latin, and the Belgic's written in French, then translated into Latin, and then the canons, of course, are written in Latin for the international body, but they're also written in Dutch. So so what happened was the churches in the Netherlands, as they were forming up, they used the Belgic Confession because it was the first one that was written, and it was circulated in the southern part, at least, of the Netherlands. Today Belgium. In those days, the Netherlands was bigger than today, but and Heidelberg Catechism was translated from German to Latin to Dutch and was spread around. It was translated in there like Greek and Hebrew too. It's like the most widely translated confession, catechism. So that one was adopted early because it was used as a preaching guide. And then later on, of course, the canons, that's like a couple of decades later, a generation or two later, that was written within the Dutch Reformed churches because of controversy. So those three all just kind of, got, put together into, in the Reformed churches, like, hey, these are our confessions, even though they didn't necessarily arise out of those churches.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay.
So.
Yeah. And I think what I appreciate and like about the style about the Belgic Confession and the articles, the way they're listed out, is you can see exactly what it's going to explain in the title. So like it says Article 35, the Sacrament of the Lord's Supper.
Yeah, you don't have to guess what's going to be in the article. You got to get a clue into it.
Or Article 36, the Civil Government. So these are really good. Like I can see the headline. It's like a newspaper. And then you know exactly what you're going to read, and then it explains it.
Yep. Yeah. There's 37 articles. So, I tell people who are new to reading these things, obviously you could sit down and read it in one sitting. But you could also, read it on Sunday afternoon, one article, or like over a whole month. Like you can read it, at breakfast or lunch or dinner, whenever you read your Bible or pray, and just read one article at a time, and you'll get through it roughly in a month. So,
so if you want to combine the two things that you're never supposed to talk about at a dinner table, which is politics and religion,
there you go.
Just
bring out the Belgic.
I got Article 36 here to just Trump to say it.
That's right. Yeah. So it's last question is kind of a two-parter.
Okay.
First would be with the Belgic, and we've kind of already answered it, maybe more precisely, more kind of tuned in, focused on this. What use, if you can say it, what use is the Belgic in the Reformed Church? Why do we use this stuff? How is it used in the Reformed Church? And then I'll ask my second part of that after this.
Well, yeah. How's it used? I mean, it's used first and foremost to rein in idiot pastors like me, right? From heresy, keeping us from, being idiots. And positively, then we try to use it. From time to time, we might read articles during the service, or, we'll obviously use it throughout, kind of teaching or sermon series, Sunday school, even, and I use it, with new people who are new, just to kind of read through it, because it's pretty, it's somewhat, it's fairly simple.
Yeah, it's easy to read.
Yeah, pretty easy to read. So yeah, and I find most people who come to Reformed Church, the Heidelberg Catechism is awesome, and you can't go wrong. The Belgic Confession, I find people read it and they are kind of surprised because it doesn't sound to them what they expect to read in a Reformed confession. Like, it's not all about predestination. It's not all about those kinds of topics, right? It's pretty basic,
high flighty academic language.
Yep. Yeah, and it's very gospel centered and Christ centered, and it talks about predestination in one article, very short article, but it doesn't major on those things. It just mentions it because we believe that, and Christians have always believed that, right? It's only until there's controversies that it has to be more precise.
So my second question, which is going to kind of condense my second part of it, we'll condense this. We asked the same one to Clark before. We'll ask the same one for the next few episodes. Imagine you've just finished a church service, and for some reason we're in a building with an elevator in it, and you open to the elevator and somebody else walks in and you're like, you know what? I'm not sure about this Belgic thing. Like, why is this something I should be reading, confessing, all this stuff? What would your minute-long elevator pitch for the Belgic be?
I'd ask, are you a Christian? And if a person said, no, I'm not a Christian, I'd say, well, this is one of the quickest ways that you can read something and know what a Christian believes. If a person is a Christian, I would say, well, what's your problem? Snap out of it. This is awesome Christian stuff. This is what we've always believed as Christians. And, how many Bible verses are referenced in here, and how much scripture is quoted. And, just like, this is a very devotional confession of faith written by a martyr for persecuted Christians. Like, enter into the joy of being a suffering Christian, So
I love it. Yeah. I don't know, Nick, if you have anything else, and other than that, what we talked about pre-recording is for each one of these episodes for the Reformed, we have special giveaways, and you won't know what they are until you go onto our Twitter at guiltgracepod, and we have one that's every Tuesday. So P&R, so Presbyterian Reformed Publisher, they're supplying basically all the books in their catalog for this season. So if you go on Twitter, it may or may not have something to do with the Belgic. You'll have to see. And we may or may not also be giving away some of Pastor Danny's books as well. So if you guys want to learn more about the Belgic, Crossway's got some stuff on the Belgic. Dr. Robert Godfrey has some stuff there's a few people I think who have some stuff on the Belgic. Look forward to that. But other than that, is how can they find you? How can they find your work and keep up with what Pastor Danny's doing?
Well, this book, I just checked before we were finishing here. It's on Amazon still. I haven't taken it off yet. Still there. Yeah, it's still there. It's like $21. It's like
we'll link to it on our show notes. If you guys want more of this, more of this exposition, we'll link to it in our show notes.
Yeah. I mean, so the book is a big book. Obviously it's like an explanation of
but it's not hard to read at all.
No. Oh yeah, thanks. I mean, hopefully it's not, but it's like a 500-page book. It's $20, for hardcover, so it's a pretty good deal. So Amazon for the book, and then people can find me. I've kind of distance myself from fake book, and I try to I'm more on Twitter these days. So
everyone's getting off Facebook these days.
You mean fake book.
Yeah, fake book. So so people can find me there. They can find me on Twitter, I'm or just our church, oceansideurc.org. Yep.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming on, and we're gonna have this friendly face on again next week. When you guys listen to this next week, we're actually recording it right after this. We'll talk about the canons of Dort. So if you guys ever heard of Tulip, kind of got into Calvinism through Tulip, we're gonna talk about a document that in a sense inspired that. But thanks for coming on. Thanks for talking about the Belgic. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.